Catus. Maximus here. Here's a classic Milwaukee close quarters compact 3/8 inch right angle drill. It's 3.5 amp, 1300 RPM drill. Milwaukee, when they moved a lot of their production over to China, they discontinued these drills. These have always kind of been a mixed bag. If you use them hard and they get pretty hot, sometimes the plastic can start to get a little bit soft, and that's how the gears run, because the motor's this way, so it actually has a set of reduction gears and bevel gear. The gears can separate, so I've actually seen these with stripped out gears. There's quite a few reviews of people having issues, so I think Milwaukee said instead of redesigning it, they're just going to drop it. And apparently Milwaukee doesn't have a compact 3/8 right angle drill right now, which is unfortunate. I kind of like this design. It's pretty easy to use with one hand, and it actually had distinct advantages over its competitors. One being, it is really easy to use with one hand, where you can reach up with one hand and get into a very tight spot, has a pretty good variable speed, and is reversible. A lot of these earlier drills were not, I should say, competitors' units of these compact right angle drills were not reversible, so that was always nice with the Milwaukee. And the Milwaukee internally was generally built pretty well. It just didn't have enough material for the amount of forces that are causing the gears to want to pry apart in this type of design. So that was part of the issue, but generally my experience is they've been pretty reliable. These plastic covers can break. I mean, it is pretty compact. It was never super compact, such as a classic Black & Decker Shorty. They don't make them like they used to, twin fans there. But the Shorty was pretty much the standard, just because how compact it is and the way that they offset the chuck so you could get right up into a corner. But as far as this Milwaukee is concerned, wasn't too bad. One of the bigger issues was the fact that it was like $150. It's been when it was new, and that was 20 years ago. Milwaukee, I think, came out with these in the 90s. But they were pretty expensive, so it was pretty disappointing, especially with Milwaukee's all heavy duty, to have really any kind of significant gear problems. And there were just too many, so they just kind of had an issue. So these are a lighter duty Milwaukee tool, but they're just invaluable for that one specific motion, which is being able to use it one-handed and get a fair amount of pressure behind the drill chuck. Even with this 3/8 version, you still have to be careful, because if it jammed, I mean, your hand's really close to the chuck, so even though it doesn't have a lot of torque, you're not holding it out here with a lot of leverage, and you can really twist this around. It can smack your hand around if you got your head close, like you're in a cabinet, and it can smack you in the face. So these definitely had their dangers. People oftentimes forget to unplug them, and so when they're trying to change a bit, they'd bump the trigger and beat up their fingers when the chuck key's in the hole. So they had their various issues. Nowadays, I would recommend any number of brands. It used to be Hitachi. I don't think Hitachi's a tool company anymore, but Makitas, Bosch's, even DeWalt's, even though this is old Black & Decker Industrial. This was DeWalt's version, or Black & Decker. They are DeWalt now. Has been making these for a long time. These are definitely not as good at ergonomics to use one-handed, although they do work, but they have a distinct advantage where you have this really large trigger bar where you can just activate it however you needed it to. And in certain situations where you did want to have a little more control, you can grab it by the back of the tool and be able to press on the front of the chuck or on the front of the gear case. That made a big difference. These also have an internal metal frame, so they are made for heavier duty work. That's really kind of the surprising thing, is when Milwaukee came out with these, they were expensive, and the case was not as heavy duty as it should have been. For the reputation of other Milwaukee quarter drills that can pretty much take any amount of punishment, people know about these. These can take a lot of punishment, so it's kind of surprising that these just, you had to be a little bit more careful with it. And that's kind of what Milwaukee's thinking these days, is they don't have one of these. They just think people are going to use big old half-inch drills. And obviously something like a whole hog is insane compared to something lighter weight and compact like this. Which begs the question, why on earth did Milwaukee actually come out with a 379, a half-inch version of one of these? And yes, I happen to have this. This one is to show that if you did treat them a little bit more respectfully, especially being aware of of it overheating, that they can last just fine. The gears in this 1/2 inch one are just fine. I had to replace the chuck. This plastic protector ring can get damaged and broken, so it's a little disappointing. But this one's 750 RPM with the same 3.5 amp motor, and so the 3/8 was 1300 RPM. And this drill has actually come in handy a couple times. Just got to go slow and watch out for it jamming up. But there was just nothing else that, for a long time, that was really in this class. Now there's Chinese knockoffs of these, and I really would not recommend them because I wouldn't. If Milwaukee had trouble with the gears, Chinese ones are going to be even worse. I'll do a couple quick test drills here. One thing I did want to mention, since this one's nearly new, great strain relief, pretty good. Help prevent the wire from fatiguing right there and conking out on you. Too bad they didn't do that on the other end of the plug. This is a really hard plastic, so the wire is just going to fatigue right here in pretty short order. And I've always been curious, as manufacturers will spend a bunch of effort putting nice strain release on one end of the cord and absolutely nothing on the other. Anyway, let's go and knock this apart. It does have a lot of screws in there, 9T25s. That was a special sound. Let me get these out of here. Quick note on disassembly. The one screw right here at the thin part at the top of the head, a little bit shorter than the rest. Alright, here we are. Let's get a little closer. And good old clamshell. As with most power tools, it's usually the side that that you remove the screws from is the side that you actually pop off first. Not always, though, so you kind of have to watch and be careful. Make sure we got all of them out of here. Oh, this case is a little bit tight. A lot more to say about power tools and hand tools when I review and talk about them, and makes sense. They're much more complicated. Wow, this thing is pretty recalcitrant. It might have also helped if I didn't forget one screw down there in the bottom. It happens. So, our little throttle bar kind of came apart here. Talk about this pretty quickly. This is a B series, so power tools have revisions just like software. Many tool companies will be type 1, type 2, etc. Milwaukee just keeps track of it via serial numbers. If you ever go to Milwaukee's site, one of the distinct advantages is Milwaukee provides instruction manuals, wiring diagrams, and part explosions for tools going back to the 60s and 70s. It's one of the things that sets them apart is, if anything, you can get a teardown instructions for any Milwaukee tool that you're pretty much going to run into unless it was made in the 50s or earlier. They're always based on the serial number, but in the 90s or so, they started going with A, B, C series, that type of thing, in all their tools. So that's how you know this is a more recent unit. People talk about, have even criticized me on how much grease I put in my tools. This is how much grease Milwaukee puts in from the factory. It's just totally filled up. One of the things that helps them last is by putting plenty of grease in there. Super simple design. You actually have this rod that's pressing against this rocker arm, and then that presses up against the variable speed trigger. There is a little boot on there to keep dust out, so pretty complicated little mechanism inside here. The motor is okay. They didn't do a ton of work, but it does have lacquer, a type of epoxy that's keeping the wires from vibrating around. Only crimped connectors, but they did put some extra glue inside there to prevent those wires from, just to keep them a little bit more stable. Does use Bakelite brush holders, they're not metal brush holders. Because of the space constraints in here, the fan's a little bit small. But overall, it's not too bad. And the reason, it's also interesting that the fan, as you can see, is at the back of the motor. So it's pulling in from the top and blowing out at the bottom. So it's kind of interesting. And being a Milwaukee, it's proper. And that's what was always the shame. Now, this is a B series, so this may have had slight revisions, so it has less gear issues than much earlier units. But they do everything right. I mean, having the little boot there, a decent motor, and then all ball bearings. That's one of the things that sets apart Milwaukee is they try to put in rolling bearings more than the average, even professional tool company. Many tool companies will say, you know, in a situation like a reduction gear, where we can get away with one side being a sleeve bearing or maybe at the back of the chuck spindle. But you can see this Milwaukee, it's all ball bearings all the way through. Helical gears, that's a spiral bevel, so that's a helical bevel gears. So it's a more expensive machining process. They really did go through it pretty well. But on earlier ones, I suspect that the plastic that's surrounding these bearings here on this reduction gear was the real culprit. What ends up happening is that you run it hard, the gears do get hot, the plastic softens and even either allows this gear to push away and start stripping here or stripping here. I suspect it's more around the chuck because, you know, as you put this through a lot of heavy use, it will be putting a lot of stress around the plastic. So you just had to treat these respectfully, but they are beautifully engineered, and it's always neat just to see how they climb that strange angle of the drills. It's straight motor, straight gears, and then a very odd 55-degree spiral bevel gear. So that's actually not a true 90. And so it's pretty rare to see bevel gears that actually aren't at 90 degrees. We definitely know this is a more recent unit because we've got our very special little tracking tag conveniently tucked down in there. This is an asset control anti-shoplifting tags. Power tools had gotten to such a severe point of theft that retailers said, can you please integrate the little tags inside the tool so we can stop having drug addicts steal tools. So anyway, just do a couple little drilling options. And overall, my general comment about this, I mean, they do use a couple of large bearings for the chuck. I mean, it is nicely made. Is if you buy one of these, don't spend too much money. People are trying, there's still a lot of new old stock. There's new old stock of these up on eBay. And people are just trying to get an outrageous amount of money, trying to get $200. It's just, no, not even close. So anyway, just a simple little drill. We'll use old familiar block here. Some of my longer term subscribers may have seen this before. So it doesn't run too bad, but I can feel it, and I was grabbing on the back side of it there just because you can still feel it wanting to really torque around. Your hand is just so far up. You have so little leverage against the chuck. You do have to still be kind of careful with these. Figured I'd give, though, even though this is the Black & Decker, the DeWalt, which they do still sell, it's competition, and I don't have the Makita or the Bosches or anything. Just to give it a little sound test. This works, but actually it sounded like the Milwaukee had an easier time of it. Didn't seem to quite bog down as badly. The Milwaukee did. This seems to be bogging down just a little bit more. Even though this is 3.2 amps at 1200 RPM, so it should be about the same output power on the spindle, this thing really, it's surprising how much trouble it has doing this. So there you have it, a little look inside, a little demonstration, a little tiny comparison against its competition. But and that Black & Decker, I think the DeWalt's are reversible, but that one I showed you was not variable speed and is not reversing. It's actually kind of surprising where this thing is reversible and variable speed and does get your hand in a position where you can do a lot of drilling with one hand in some just extremely compact areas. Hopefully these newer revision of them have less gear issues. I did show that 1/2-inch one, which had quite a bit of use. Like this guy, which has held up fine. I'm also noticing, though, that this is also a B series unit. So maybe in the very last of the units, they really did do some changes which helped increase gearbox reliability. And there's really not a lot else like these. That's why when you look on Amazon, the Chinese are now just shamelessly knocking these off. They're just exact copies, only lower quality Chinese. And it's a shame that Milwaukee didn't sell more of these. They were a bit spendy, $150 for a little palm drill. That's asking a lot. But it is higher performance than its competition, no question, and had better features. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.